Point number 3 is he spent his winters at Beth-Sarim. And we can see that from that Messenger magazine that we looked at earlier.
And I doubt, even without documentation of that, I would assume Rutherford would have willingly, involuntarily spent the winters there in Beth-Sarim anyway, without documentation of it during the Depression. And interesting note, in the messenger here, he's got a cane. So was that for effect? For his illness that he needed, a cane, or what? What was that?
I don't know because I see him in a lot of footage walking with the cane, but he's not using it. He's just holding onto the cane.
It worked.
Scripture said he would rule with a rod of iron after 1914, right?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the Watchtower says his mail should be sent to San Diego during the winter months. Here's a letter Rutherford wrote from Beth-Sarim, and it's written to Moyle about Salter. And it's interesting that both of these men later on went and sued Rutherford for slandering him in the Watchtower literature. So they took him to court. Rutherford lost. They won. So it's
And
interesting.
that'll be another discussion that we'll get to. Now I find it interesting, the letterhead, that instead of using like a regular Brooklyn, Bethel, or Watchtower Society letterhead, this was kind of like his own personal letterhead that he got to write on this. And if you're conducting Watchtower business, why would you have a Beth-Sarim letterhead?
He's doing Watchtower business at Beth-Sarim.
But you're still working for the society, so to say. I find it odd that he's got a personal letterhead. That's where I was going with this.
Personal letterhead for his personal mansion. Point number 4 says that Beth-Sarim was built with funds that were a direct contribution for that purpose. So let's follow the money. Where did the money come from? So we see here that the Finnish mystery was discarded, and Rutherford's new book on Revelation was brought in about this time. This is the 1931 yearbook. And it says that they were trying to understand Revelation, and they couldn't up until that point, and now they could. But isn't that what they claim for the Finnish mystery? So during this 31 yearbook, it says, during the year, loving hands provided a comfortable house pleasantly situated at San Diego, California, wherein the president and his office assistants can escape the rigors of the winter and there be enabled to go on with the work. This provision is graciously acknowledged as from the Lord. He knows who are the givers and will bless them accordingly. The title to that house is in the society and is held in trust for the perpetual use of God's faithful one. So who were the givers? We know from that title deed in the Historical Society of California that Dr. Eccles purchased the land and sold it to Martin. Dr. Eccles and Brother Martin. Brother Martin, he's also one that went to prison with Rutherford and that Watchtower bunch. And you can get that story or some of that in the sheep and goats discussion that Paul and I had.
Here's the story.
Martin writes the truth about the San Diego house, and it says that the money was not from the society. In company with a few other brethren, we pressed this matter upon him. At that time, the Lord having provided the means for the building of the house, so that it would not be a burden on the society. He finally consented that the house might be built only on the condition that it should be exclusively for the use of the Lord's work, henceforth and forever.
Okay, let me make a comment here. So basically, Martin is stating in the Golden Age that Rutherford said that the only condition he'll agree to build that mansion is if it's used for the Lord's work.
Yes.
Well, I'll go on record saying I will let the Watchtower Society build me a mansion, but provided it's only used for the Lord's work. So that's a broad statement right there. I'm not gonna agree with that entirely. You're still getting a mansion out of the deal. So Why make a statement like that unless you're trying to, again, plant seeds, use a little psychology to influence others that, hey, the judge wasn't going to take it. We offered to do it, but he said, okay, only if it's for the Lord. That puts it in a whole other perspective.
This Robert Martin, it says in the next page of the Golden Age, this Martin sold it to Rutherford for $10. And Rutherford gets the idea, well, how could we make this look even more legitimate that we're using it for the Lord's work? Let's write and deed the property to the faithful men of old. And when they return, we'll give it to King David, to whoever the other ones are listed here, right?
Even though the Bible says they will dwell in Jerusalem. Unless this was going to be King David's winter home also.
But remember, this is the exact time that they're now claiming we're the new nation. We're the Israel. The other Israel rejected Jesus as Messiah, and so therefore God rejects them. They won't get the promises that was covenanted to them. They won't get those promises that were promised. They're now involved very much in this replacement theology at this time. The Watchtower are the Jews. This replacement theology is another discussion for another time.
Okay, then once again, Jeff, why was it deeded to the faithful men of old? And that just agrees with my personal thought that it was to plant seeds into people, to accept a mansion being built for the president of the Watchtower Society. And with that said, who paid for the Cadillacs?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to. Or the liquor. Actually, I think it's in the Moyle trial or the Salter trial. So that's
we'll cover that when we get
another discussion for another time, as we say.
If I remember, the Cadillacs were funded by the society.
Really? Yeah, we'll take a look.
Now, I'm not gonna insist on that, but I'm pretty sure they were, because I remember the justification. Maybe I read it through the Moyle trial years back. Was basically he needed it to get around, and he was trying to look successful. That the organization was a successful one, not a ragtag outfit. And that especially during the Depression, they wanted to show, see, the Lord is blessing us.
Yeah, Salter was head of the Canada branch, and Rutherford slandered him and Moyle too, publicly in the Tower. And he also did the same thing with Fisher. And we had that discussion in The Man Who Dared Disfellowship Judge Rutherford. So this was a habit that Rutherford had, right?
Now, when he slandered Canada, was that when the Canadian whiskey stopped being shipped to the United States? Because
Prohibition was over by that point.
But he was getting whiskey shipped in. I remember reading that, and it might have come from the Moya trial.
And it was the Salter trial, and Salter states very clearly, Salter and Moyle both. Salter brought the liquor in for him, so
I'll have to refresh
it's on record.
My memory.
So Robert J. Martin, as we said earlier, was one of the Watchtower bunch that went to prison with Rutherford in 1918. You could see he's got a glass eye there. This is his prison intake record. And then I've marked out which one he is in the photo. It says he's got a white film over his eye. Now, who was he? Let's look at his history a little bit to get a little details about that. So again, back to the 1975 yearbook. It says he was the one who helped acquire and install the Battleship, that big press that they nicknamed the Battleship. That's really where they were able to start printing on their own. They had smaller presses before that, and they printed outside as well during the Russell years and shortly after. But here they were really trying to get into the printing work themselves, and Martin was the one who really was the one involved with that. Martin died in 1932, and Knorr is the one who took over right after that, and then Knorr later became president. So there's the direct connection there with Knorr filling Martin's place. Robert also gave some of the Watchtower lectures. As we know, he was one of the office managers of Brooklyn and one of the Watchtower directors, according to the 1930 International Bible Students Association yearbook. He was also business manager of the Golden Age magazine. And it's interesting that in the December 23rd, 1924 Enterprise, it says that he suffered a physical breakdown and he needed a 5-week vacation to recuperate. It was a stressful job, very stressful job.
Now, here's something very interesting, okay? A lot of the leaders apparently had breakdowns and who were writing serious articles for the society. Woodworth had a mental breakdown, and if I remember correctly, was thinking demons were harassing him.
Yeah, that's in the 1913 convention report. Yeah.
So here we are, another leader, having a breakdown. And then who was the other one, Jeff?
PSL Johnson.
Johnson, that's right.
Suffered a breakdown. He tried to take over the society in London. They shipped him back, and he caused a whole dissension and split here in the United States. And they formed a movement called the Layman's Home Missionary Movement. And he wrote 17 more volumes of studies in the scriptures that they call the Epiphany volumes. I have them here on my shelf behind me.
Now, I'd like to add another interesting point. Somebody from England pointed out that Great Britain did a study of mental illness in religious groups, and it was stated in it. I'd have to research that one before I can confirm a documentation, but I saw it back years ago. Jehovah's Witnesses suffer a percentage at a higher rate of mental illness than the general population. So I'm finding it, and as you know, you're interested more so in history while I like it. I'm interested in the psychology of the movement. So I find this very interesting to go along with all the other facts.
This is Robert Martin's passport application. And in this application, it says his father, John H. Martin, was born in Germany and emigrated to the USA from Hamburg in 1855. And that's a picture of his parents down there in the corner. Also says he's blind in the left eye, up there in the upper right corner.
Do we know how he became blind in his eye?
We can make a guess based on his previous occupation. And we stated earlier, we need to follow the money to find out, where did Robert J. Martin get the money from? I have a very good idea where he got the money from, based on the documentation about his life. And we'll get to that in just a moment. So this passport application is interesting because if you look at the New Era Enterprise for May 1925, it mentions this exact trip that Martin and Rutherford, I have Rutherford's passport application as well, it mentions the trip that they took and who went. Rutherford went, and also Bonnie Boyd, Miss Bonnie Boyd, so we'll have a future discussion on that one.
Her.
R.J. Martin, George Kendall, Walter Salter, another discussion on that one. Merman of Canada, Sisters Lillian Acker Haviland and Schneeberger of Cincinnati, Ohio, and Sister Hamilton of Bethel. And they took a steamer overseas. An interesting trip.
Once again, the perks of being an officer in a corporation and being friends with an officer in a corporation.
But even more so, the perks got a little more interesting because there's a couple more stories in the Enterprise. Macmillan and Martin, when they were in Europe, they traveled by airplane from London to Amsterdam. And remember, that's a brand new technology. A distance of 300 miles in 2.5 hours and an altitude of 5,000 feet. That was something incredible at the time, right? And it says, Brother Macmillan prefers fast talking to fast riding. It's very interesting. And then in a later Enterprise, it says, R.J. Martin advised that A.H. Macmillan held his hand when they traveled in the air recently while in Europe and stated he preferred to die on the ground rather than in the air.
Well, those older planes back then, they weren't like the cushy rides we have today. You're bouncing around, you're hearing the motors really loud. So I'm sure when that new technology came out, that was, you're taking your life in your hands. I'm going to defend him on feeling that way back then.
It was an interesting, give a little bit of insight into their characters.
So now, is that the registration card? That's his draft card, isn't it?
That's his draft card. And it's interesting that his draft card, it lists his occupation as prisoner at the U.S. Penitentiary, Atlanta, Georgia.
Following the money, if you're in prison, where did he get the money to purchase all
Where
this?
did he get the money? Yeah. So we're going to find out, I think, where his money came from. The 1910 census lists Martin's line of business as a manufacturer of hand instruments. What does that mean, hand instruments? The Martin family owned a band instrument company. And according to the book called The Devil's Horn, that actually has a little bit of that family history. The Martin Instrument Company was called the oldest union band instrument company in the world. And this company had started in 1906. So they unionized. And you could see the buildings and some of the layouts and designs of some of the factories where they were building. And the family logo, the Martin Band Instrument Company.
I find it funny, back around that same time, but prior to all this, the C.F. Martin Guitar Company, another person, if I remember correctly, from Germany, came to the United States, and for whatever reason, they brought musical. I don't think they're related in any way, because
I don't know.
the guitar company would have promoted their brother, in this. But it is. I found that interesting. As somebody who likes to enjoy music and all that, and the history of that too.
We could see from the documentation there was a family squabble in the Martin family, and they had to sell it. They had to sell the company. They couldn't get along after the father died, and each one got a section of the money. And Brother Martin was able to take the money, store it away for a rainy day, and he was able to fulfill his mission at Watchtower with very limited funds. He was able to keep those funds and use it for Beth-Sarim much later on. Robert J. Martin served as, I think he was serving as vice president or secretary and treasurer. And so he had experience in running a business operation. That's why he got the position he had at Watchtower under Rutherford. He knew how to manage a business. And we're going to see some of that a little later on as to some of the things claimed about Rutherford, either in this discussion or in another one.
I thought the Lord chose the simplest to get his work done, rather than handpicking business entrepreneurs and successful people to assist with things like that.
Well, it seems that at least a couple of these friends of Rutherford that he was close to, as we've seen, had money. And they were willing to donate their money. The question is, how much money did they donate? What did Rutherford's mansion cost? We don't really know. There's a lot of speculation out there about how much it costs, but, what did Watchtower say? The way that Robert Martin is writing in the Golden Age magazine, the enemy charges that the mansion cost $100,000.
Now, in this, once again, who is this enemy that keeps on creeping up? Who is the enemy saying this?
This is my question too. Who is the enemy? So when I searched all of the splinter groups, it's not them, because nobody's talking about it or making any such claims.
They probably didn't know about it because it wasn't really super published in public.
I searched newspapers. I searched all the splinter groups. I searched everywhere. Nobody I can find claims that it was $100,000. Well, he's stating this in 1930. This golden age is 1930. So a lot of them didn't find out about the mansion until they actually published it in the Golden Age and the Messenger as well.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So they had no idea what was going on. So the enemy must have been actually people within Rutherford's kind of circle who were still their Bible students saying, "Hey, wait, what are we doing with this?" Maybe people in his own corporation saying, "Okay, you need a house in California for your health. We said a house, not a mansion."
It's possible, but when I search the magazines and the newspapers of the time period, I do find a ballpark figure that almost everyone seems to agree on in multiple papers and magazines. not only magazines of 1930, 31, but also magazines a decade later are claiming the same price. So I'm pretty confident the ballpark figure of $75,000 for the
Back
mansion
then.
back then is about right.
I want to know what it's worth
All right, so
in
hold on. Where's
today's
my
terms.
calculator? Okay, so $100,000 today is $1.5 million.
Wow. Wow. Over 1.5 million. Holy cow.
So that's if it was 100,000. That's not what it is. That's
Interesting.
so. Is he exaggerating the claim? Is it one person? I found some newspapers that actually tell you they're claiming it's $75,000. This is the Syracuse Herald, March 23rd, 1930. $75,000. Here's a magazine about a decade later, November 1940, also claiming $75,000.
Whoa. Okay, so let's give the benefit of the doubt. Let's pretend there's not $100,000 in there, which there probably is. But let's just go to the low figure only. What would that have been worth in today's figures?
All the newspapers are claiming 75,000 that I could find. So if you put in 75,000 just based on the sheer volume of
materials, for just the materials, correct? Because that's how it was advertised, was basically it cost this to build it. Okay, but then there's land, there's labor, architect fees.
And that was not a regular architect. He was a very special architect. He wasn't cheap. They didn't get him on the cheap. He was a more expensive architect. Let's take Robert Martin's really low estimate.
Okay.
Right? So 25,000 today would be about almost $500,000, 400,000 almost.
Which even that is a extravagant home back then.
Even now, $400,000 home would be very.
It's
nice
above
home.
average. Yeah. It's twice the average almost.
So
let's go with 75,000. Let's put everything together. I think it's fairly safe to say you can round it up to 100,000.
Yeah, if you count the land costs, which is probably a couple $1,000 to $6,000 average at that time. So let's round that down to 4,000. You also have the Cadillacs. You own two of them.
Well, hang on. Before we get to that, let's be really fair. What is 75,000? Let's start with the low. Let's assume there's no other costs, which we know there were.
So if you put in 75,000, it's still over $1 million in today's money.
And that's the conservative figure.
That's the conservative figure.
Okay, now, he's living in a $1 million mansion during the Depression.
And he's got these
and that's where I was going
12-cylinder Rolls Royce.
What are the cars worth?
The cars are worth, I looked that up as well. So on average in 1930, when I'm looking in the newspapers, I'm seeing these cars going for 10.5, and that's for a Rolls Royce that's a year or two old.
There's people today buying cars for $10,500.
Yeah, and be several years old. Almost, even a couple years old. So let's just say 10,000. That's still $151,000.
Okay, so now that's two of them. That's 300,000 plus the million. We're talking realistically, not probably throwing expenses and all this. His budget for just his lifestyle is $2 million during the Depression. It's mind-boggling. I can't. Words can't even describe a leader of a religious organization during the Depression doing that. Wow.
So a lot of these people are starving during the Depression, and he's living like a king.
He's living beyond the king.
Yeah.
He's not King David, he's King Solomon in this.
But without any wisdom.
Back then, they wouldn't make that in their lifetime.
Now let's go back and look at what the society said. So the enemy charges that the house cost $100,000, but it did not cost 1/4 that amount. I think he meant to say it was about a quarter less than that, because all the newspapers are saying about $75,000. And that should have been public knowledge at the time, looking at the deeds and all those various things.
Yeah, but back then they did not have access to public records like we do today.
But the newspapers do. Right? So
but did people know how to do that research back then?
The reporters would have.
Good point. Good point. Okay, good point.
Right? You also had the Rolls Royce, multiple Rolls Royces. So they were not cheap. I was looking up how much it cost for Rolls Royces in 1930. $10,500 for 29 Rolls in about 1931. So you're looking at probably 11, 12 grand, just a fair estimate for a higher end Rolls Royce.
And what would that be in today's?
Still $159,000.
$150K.
So think about this. If it cost that much, even the average person would not have been able to afford one of those vehicles. And he had more than one, at least one in New York, one in San Diego. And he had a mansion besides.
Now, even with his own statements that we've said earlier about him wanting to look good in the public eye, to show the society as successful, incredible, that is still over the top. You could do that in a home above average, still not that extravagant, and back then they did have the also the regular Fords and Chevrolet GM company cars. He could have been a lot less extravagant. There's no question about that, and still gave a good impression for the society. So with that said, I mean, realistically, he's living a lifestyle that he wants, that he couldn't have attained without people selling books for him. And there's no other way to say that. He bought that by getting people to sell books. That's the only way they raised the money.
Yeah, and remember the contrast between
Russell
Russell, and they wanted to donate a car, purchase a car for Russell. He said, no, let's donate it to the work, put it all into the work. Let's print the books. I don't want to use it for myself. Whereas Rutherford had the exact opposite personality and didn't mind taking any of the personal gifts if anyone wanted to curry a favor to him.
Well, but to be fair to him, he would only accept it if it was going to King David and other people, or else he wouldn't have taken it. So, yeah, this is
another point in our discussion on Beth-Sarim here.
Yeah, so, I mean, anybody who gets privilege to seeing this, and I mean privilege in reference to access to the information, how can you walk away and not say this wasn't a personal endeavor for oneself? This is not something for religious reasons. Just amazing.
Amazing. Yeah, it just blows my mind.
This is well beyond with the average person. Yeah.
It's, you know what it reminds me of? A dictator building a mansion when folks are starving to death. Like Ceausescu did in Romania. The People's Palace that they call it today. Lots of people died in Romania building that giant mansion for him. And it wasn't like the Watchtower does today, where they got brothers and sisters donating time and building it for free. This, they paid big bucks. And what about all the furnishing? Think of all the furnishing they had to purchase as well.
And that wasn't cheap. You don't put, you don't put Wayfair or the particle board furniture in a mansion. So, and that doesn't count the regular furnishings of a home, like drapes and carpeting.
Yeah.
So this is out of the ballpark. Insane.
The book Salvation explains the claimed purpose of Beth-Sarim and says, the title to Beth-Sarim is vested in the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in trust. So let's discuss what Rutherford deeded to the Watchtower regarding Beth-Sarim.